Welcome to the program, friend. Anybody watching what's going on in Ferguson has obviously been grieved for the loss of life. Also, perhaps some people would be grieved at the race baiting that's going on, at the trial of this police officer before any evidence has been heard. Now evidence has come forward, witnesses have come forward saying that Michael Brown punched him in the car. I mean, there's just a lot going on. But what I want to focus on for a moment before we run a two-part series on the business of politics is that there are horrific crimes going on in Chicago, in Detroit, in New York City, unthinkable amounts of black-on-black crime, which is horrific. It's a tragedy. But the truth of the matter is that if the officer who shot Michael Brown had been African American, most of us would never have heard about it because that type of thing sadly happens regularly. And nearly 50% of all murders committed in America are committed by young black men, according to one statistic I recently heard on the news. All of that to say this. Obama, Al Sharpton, Eric Holder, that wicked man, they are using this tragedy to mobilize their base for the 2014 general election. You need to understand that. They wait for an opportunity like this and they pounce on it. They're not going to the south side of Chicago to deal with the horrific murders that are taking place there on a nearly daily basis. Why? Because it doesn't get their base out to vote in the general election in 2014. Up until this Ferguson tragedy, there is a lot of lethargy in the Democratic Party. There's a lot of discontent with Obama and his policies. And now they have an opportunity to make this about race again, about the injustice of white people against black people. No matter what, whether the cop was right or wrong, doesn't even matter to them. They've got the narrative, they've got the story. So please understand, enormous sums of money are about to be raised off of this, and they're doing what they're doing, not just to call for justice for Michael Brown, because maybe the officer was in the right. We'll find out. But they're doing it so that they can mobilize their base. Hope you enjoy the show. Welcome to the program, friend. Who are the most powerful political people in America today? Well, some would argue people like President Obama, and clearly that would be true. But how about David Axelrod? In other words, it's not just the guy who gets into office that's powerful, but it's the guy or the guys or the women who put him there. The gatekeepers. It's actually a class of people right now. They're very rich, they're very wealthy, and they dominate Washington, D.C. They're called consultants, political consultants, campaign managers, speech writers, statisticians, people who will look at a candidate, look at a race, and then try and figure out a way, craft a plan, a strategy of how to get that man or woman in office or how to keep them there. They make exorbitant sums of money. They determine more U.S. political policy, legislative policy, than most of us would care to picture, and they're out of our reach. No one elected them. They're paid exorbitant sums of money to help get people into office, some of whom are as evil as the first cousin of Beelzebub, okay? But they're paid to keep that from us and to give political facelifts and to frame debates and arguments in a way that seduce and deceive we the people. I would proffer the idea that probably right now, the most famous political consultant is this man, Karl Rove. You've seen him before on television. Karl Rove was a fairly unknown political consultant in Texas who masterminded former Governor George Bush's advent to the White House. Karl Rove, by the way, look at this picture of Karl Rove. And now look at this picture of, yes, the devil. Do you see the similarities? Do you note that there is a strong family resemblance? I'm not making any accusations. I leave it to you, the viewer, to discern just how close those two actually are. Anyway, Karl Rove was a fairly unknown political consultant in Texas. He masterminded George Bush's ascendancy to the White House. And then he leveraged that after serving President Bush as a political consultant for 8 years. He leveraged that into a multi-million-dollar empire. We're talking hundreds of millions of dollars, in which he picks candidates, grooms candidates, gets candidates put in office, hopefully, tries to win elections. After this past election cycle, and during the election cycle, a real spitting match began to emerge. First in 2010, you might remember him fighting publicly with Sarah Palin. But in 2012, it went into earnest as he, Karl Rove, began to publicly berate the Tea Party and say that the Tea Party was going to cost the Republican Party seats, that the Tea Party's agenda was counterproductive to the interests of the Republican Party. And of course, when Todd Akin and Richard Murdoch had their difficulties, well, we'll talk about that when we come back from the break. Who is Akin? Who is Murdoch? Think. All right, this will be a little quiz. I'm going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk more about Karl Rove. We're going to read some passages from a very famous book, The Prince by Machiavelli. Don't go away.